Live lifelong fulfillment, vision in action. You live lifelong fulfillment, vision in action. Live.
And good morning. Welcome to Vision in Action Live this morning. I'm Jim Boswell, your host and the author of Lifelong Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life. On the Vision in Action Live podcast, we focus on expert knowledge, solutions, and processes that it takes to work on individual personal development. These are the component parts that allow you to construct and live the complete vision of your best life. To do this, we bring you representative experts from every conceivable discipline that can inform your thinking about your own journey to lifelong fulfillment. So welcome to today's episode. And we have an interesting episode planned for you. This will be a panel discussion about divorce dynamics with Covy and Judith Kaluzny. And let me introduce them to you. Karen is a recovering divorce attorney, as she says, a divorce coach, consultant, mediator, arbitrator, and author of When Happily Ever After Ends. And she's also a podcast host of Off the Fence, which it sounds like I need to watch that. She understands divorce, including the 10% that's legal and the 90% involving spouses and children. Now, Judith Kaluzny is also a divorce lawyer, mediator, and author of the Marriage License Handbook and The American Way of Divorce, a Fraud on Families. She's an expert in litigation and mediation, domestic violence, postnuptial and prenuptial agreements, children and custody versus parenting plans. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today on Vision in Action.
Thank you for having me. Us. Both.
Yeah. So it's really an important topic for the public. The reason we're doing this on Vision in Action is we recognize that there are upsets in life and divorce happens to be one of them. And so we'd like to arm you with some new information. And as you know, Vision in Action Live, we focus on those personal development solutions in all their relevant forms. So that's why we're doing this today. And knowing how this goes will potentially help you down the line, either yourself or a friend or whatever. So with that, I'd like to share some statistics that are relatively current about divorce, so we kind of benchmark some of our discussion to follow. So one of the reasons we ask ourselves is why get married or why not get married? So I'm going to quote from Dr. Kislev at Hebrew University. This is dated 2022, the end of the year, so it's relatively current. So why would I marry? Well, it has something to do with love, potentially, companionship, security, children, meeting social norms, or meeting religious expectations. And why not marry? Well, maybe it's too much of an imposition on my personal freedom. Maybe I'm difficult to be compatible with, or they're more difficult to be compatible with me. It might involve relationship problems. Some I'm bringing forward from before. I may not have the skill sets, whatever. It may or may not involve societal expectations, and it certainly may or may not involve financial considerations. So if we look at another article published by Forbes in November of 24 about divorce statistics, and all of this data was drawn on CDC, we have the following facts to offer. Facts, well, we're a whole. Anyway, 20% of married couples report signing a prenuptial agreement. Couples who live together before marriage are somewhat more likely to wind up in divorce. And the statistics for failure in divorce is 43% now on first marriages. And I think this is down from the accepted 50% of maybe a decade ago. Second divorces are typically about 60% and 73% for third divorces. So it's interesting that we don't really learn to get better for those people that get to third marriage. And unfortunately, I have some of that experience. The average length of a marriage prior to divorce is about 8 years. Contested divorces, well, they can take a year or more for complex ones, or they can be fairly simple and maybe take 3 months or so.
No.
Well, you're gonna fix my misinformation. Hang in there. Grounds for divorce, just to remind those that haven't been through that, is lack of commitment, infidelity, abuse, incompatibility, money issues, and just general ignorance about the institution and your place in it. The average age for divorce as of 2022 was 46 years old for men, 44 for women. Again, that's average. And it seems like women initiate divorces more than men, about 69%. And that divorcees are more likely to die earlier than married people. And in fact, it's much worse. It's almost 2 times as bad for men as it is for women. So women seem to be able to cope with being single better than men. I have a couple more facts to throw in. Again, quotes around the facts. Divorces can range from, the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates divorce of $76 billion just to get that resolved, as opposed to the average in the United States of, say, give or take 20,000. And generally that's shared between both the spouses. If there's children involved, it's usually about another 37% more expensive. If there's no children involved, you get a discount. Hey, 10%. And California has some of the highest costs of divorce, and Montana has some of the lowest. So these are just random selected statistics to help us condition our discussion. So thank you, Judith. And again, thank you, Karen, for joining us today. I'd like to start out with, I noticed that, as I mentioned to you before we started the program, I don't have a regular divorce lawyer on the program. I looked. I could not find one who does podcasts. I don't think they really think they have a message. So why is it that you have expanded traditional divorce lawyer activity into the greater scheme of consulting, mentoring, and so forth? Maybe you could speak to us about how that occurred for each of you. Karen, you want to start?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I started, quite frankly, because I saw a gap between what people think a lawyer is going to do and what a lawyer actually does. And what I realized is that for most people, divorce is about 10% legal. The other 90% is kids, money, practical things, real estate. It's emotions. Emotions drive divorce. So there's a whole lot of things that people need, and they want to put all the pieces together, and they think a divorce lawyer is going to do that, but the lawyer's only going to do the legal part. It's not their job to sit and listen to your emotional issues, to try to help you figure out, okay, what do I do first, second, third? What about the kids? What about this? What about that? They'll do the legal end, but everything else is up to you. So I stepped into that gap so that my clients could do it better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Judith?
Well, once upon a time, I had a client, deputy sheriff, who had a child out of wedlock, and then he was married and had he and his wife had a child. And the mother of the out of wedlock child, the grandmother, called him up and says, "Your kid is living in a drug house. If you don't go get him, I will." So he did, and he came to me to legalize the parent relationship. And we worked out a little visiting plan with the mother with supervised visits. 2 months later, her mother hired her a lawyer, and we went to court, and the court ordered a psychological evaluation, and the evaluator was very aggressive and abusive, and it went on 3 months and cost $5,000. And we finally get back to court. And I wrote a wonderful brief for the trial. It was great. We had a different judge, but not the one who appointed the. So anyway, So mom's lawyer calls the psychologist to the stand with his 53-page report. The judge didn't want to hear from the psychologist. The judge did not want to read the 53-page report. The judge several times had to tell mom's lawyer to shut up. The judge talked directly to the parents. And he said, well, Dad, you want to blah, blah, blah. Mom, you feel like blah, blah, blah. In 20 minutes, he had worked out a parenting plan. And I thought, why didn't we do this at the beginning? And from then on, I was highly aware of the illogic of the court process for divorce and parenting. And by the way, 17 states have abolished those ugly words, custody and visitation. And they call it parenting plans. And California, we think, is liberal. 1989, the state Senate said, keep custody. Never mind parenting plan. Anyway, so that's how I got thinking about a different way to do family law.
Right. My experience had been in my own, which, it happens to people. I found that, yes, my lawyer was not up to advising me on certain things. So I found that a licensed social worker, that I could talk to, who had some experience with this, was a reasonable alternative. But again, that was back in the days where there were black and white lines, more or less, about these disciplines. And it sounds like you two are doing much more of that 90% that's not law, and trying to rationalize what you're saying, Judith, about, the court process not really being to the advantage of the two litigants, if you will. It's more about them, I guess.
Yeah. If I can jump in, I was, during my career, I started out as a trial lawyer, and then I went to the government, ran a bureau for the government for a while, and then I opened my own practice and went to divorce court. So I had a decade of experience in court before I went to divorce court for the first time. And when I walked in, I looked around, I said, well, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I mean, it's one thing to have somebody on the witness stand and ripping their face off in cross-examination when you're talking about somebody who did really horrible things to another human being, manufactured drugs that killed babies, or, God knows what, right? But when it's your spouse and you got to go sit next to them at the soccer game tonight, there is no universe where this makes sense. And what the challenge is, I think, that you're taking what is essentially a social and family issue and sticking it into court, which was never designed to fix these kinds of problems. So it doesn't do it particularly well. And to Judith's point, I mean, I kept looking for that better way, and people expect it to be different than it is. And the challenge is, when your expectations aren't in line with reality, you can be in a world of hurt when you go into court that way.
Right.
I'd like to mention, in California, the Judicial Council, the people that run the courts, did a survey some years ago about the different branches of law, criminal, civil, probate, and family, and to what people want from their courts. For family law, what people wanted was a chance to tell their story and a fair process. And they don't get either one. The judges don't want to hear your story. You can tell your story to your lawyer, and then the lawyer will charge you for the time to hear it. And then he'll tell your story to the other lawyer and charge you for the time he tells it. But actually, my new book, The American Way of Divorce, is subtitled A Fraud on Families. And the way I came to think of it as fraud was another Judicial Council statistics, is that in this year, I first discovered this, there were 365,000 divorces that were completed in the state of California. Mm-hmm. And of those that were completed by a trial in front of a judge, 1,300.
Right.
All those others, I call it trial by carborundum. They wear you down until you finally sit down and agree to something.
Right, right.
So you don't get a chance to tell your story to a judge. You do not get a fair process.
Right.
Well,
So please go on.
I was just going to say, I have a beautiful quote that a friend of mine, a fellow coach, Kate Van Dyke, used to say before she retired. She said, "Fair is the four-letter F word of divorce." What you think is fair might be different than me and somebody else. So the idea of people seeking fairness or justice, and I'm using those terms in air quotes, is, you're just not going to get it. So to your point, Judith, if you want to tell someone your story, go get a coach, go get a therapist, tell it to somebody else. You're just not going to get that chance in court.
Right. I had instance to, I was in Massachusetts and I had the instance to see the court simply refute either my arguments or my spouse's arguments and just say, in Massachusetts, we're common law. We split it 50-50. And they just did it. And to be honest, all things being equal and me having to get my say and so forth, I can't fault them for doing that. I actually think it came out being the right solution for us. And I kind of think, I'm in New Mexico, which again is a, common law, but not a common property or a community property state. And I still think that makes the job of the courts a little bit more rational and provides a little better expectations for the participants. What do you think?
Yeah, there's the commission that writes uniform the laws, and
Right.
they have done one uniform marital property law. The only state that has adopted that is Massachusetts. There's about 17 states have community property, except Florida calls it marital property.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's the way it ought to be.
Well, I don't know. I'm gonna push back on that, because the reason that the laws are that they are the way they are is that you've got to choose between, do you want a rigid law that gives certainty? Like if you're in a community property state, it's 50-50 division of marital asset or community property assets, period, full stop. In all the rest of the states, it's equitable distribution, which means we get back to that word fair, that property is divided fairly, okay, whatever that means. And so that doesn't give you the same level of certainty, but it gives you more flexibility. And in certain circumstances, that flexibility can be helpful. Like if you don't have a lot of marital property, but one person has a lot of non-marital property, is a 50-50 distribution, air quotes, fair, right? So that's the tightrope that you're walking is, do you want certainty or do you want flexibility? And there's pros and cons of either one. The bottom line is, if any people who are getting divorced can manage to stay out of court, that's going to give you the best chance of doing whatever in your mind is fair or best for your kids.
Right. The state of Washington had coped with that by giving, they were community property, except when there were children involved. The person who had the majority time with the children would get more in terms of what was needed to take care of the kids. So, but on the other hand, I mean, my thought was, while you're talking, Karen, is that to decide what's equitable, you're going to have to put on a trial and arguments, and it really extends the case and causes hostility and a lot of more time and court time, and then try to find a judge that's going to hear your case.
Yeah.
Well, if I were, so say I'm new and I need the help of a lawyer, my question becomes, okay, after a period of time, I de-emotionalize, what's going on to be a little bit more rational. And I say to my lawyer, well, I'd just soon we solve this between my spouse and myself, and we come to what Karen was talking about is roughly what's a fair solution, and recognizing whether you have dependents, children and that sort of thing as well. and solve it ourselves and simply have the court agree that that's perfectly fine. If I'm in a community property state, I don't really want to be overridden by, a judge or, someone else who doesn't have our best interests at heart. And so I kind of wonder if we're really positioned to do that. The two of you probably are, but if the lawyer on the other side is doing law, I don't see the receptiveness there to solve it outside the court system, that sort of thing. So do I have an alternative then to take it to court, I guess is the question I'm putting to you.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of alternative dispute resolution processes available to anybody all over the country, right? That having been said, you're still going to have to take it to court in that only a judge can sign your divorce agreement, right? So at some point, somebody takes some paperwork to the judge and the judge says yay or nay, right? But there's all kinds of different alternatives to keep you out of court. So in other words, you settle out of court. You can use mediation. You can use collaborative divorce. You can use, there's some people call it cooperative divorce. You can just sit at the kitchen table with your spouse, figure out an agreement and have the lawyers write it up. There's a lot of ways you can do this that doesn't involve going to court, spending a ton of time and a ton of money and ending up mortal enemies.
Yeah, I would say when I did mediation here in this state, we mailed it in. When we finished all the paperwork, we mailed in the divorce papers, and it's presented by the clerk to the judge, and he signs it. And, so nobody has to go to court at all. I want to tell you two stories that are my favorite. I had a couple came in for mediation in February one year. They had one house, 2 pensions, 3 kids, and spousal support for a stay-at-home dad. Before April was finished, they were divorced and finished. Everything was done. I had another case where a man lived across the street in an apartment, saw my sign, came over, wanted to mediate his divorce, but he and his wife had already split. She had hired a nice lawyer who the first thing did a parenting plan. So I said, well, I can't contact her. They had a lot of assets. I can't contact her because she has a lawyer. But I wrote up for him a proposal how to finish the rest of the division of property and support with a certified financial advisor and how to choose the advisor. And he was going to pay $10,000 a month in temporary support. And he gave this proposal to his soon-to-be ex-wife, and she got angry, fired her nice lawyer, hired the #1 shark of Orange County. And 4 years and $429,000 later in attorney fees, 5 court appearances, 2 long days of negotiating in lawyers' offices, the two of them went to a coffee shop, spent all night, and wrote their own agreement.
Wow.
So
high price to pay.
Assets on the table, the lawyers will find a way.
And how long did that process take? That sounds like a year of time right there.
4 years.
Oh my God.
4 years.
4 years.
And $429,000 in attorney's fees.
Right. So those people hurt themselves by getting stuck.
By getting lawyers that want and deciding to fight it out. Or she decided, and what could he do? When one person decides to go the hostile way, you're stuck.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's a
good story. That's a good story, Judith. So, what's your experience with undoubtedly you've come in contact with, early divorcees and, they're emotionally engaged in the disconnect process, some in pain, some in consulting, all that kind of thing. How do you engage that? What do you find works? What should, someone on the outside looking for help for their divorce expect? Or should we be steered to other resources?
I couldn't answer that. I don't ever seem to deal with people post-divorce.
No, I was saying when they just come to you,
Oh,
you know,
oh,
and they're all wrapped up in the emotions, all of that. In other words, not thinking too clearly. How do you work with those folks or get started?
well, my clients, I never seem terribly emotional. Maybe because I didn't try to delve into the emotional part of it. I
Okay.
remember early on, I was part of a shelter for battered women, and I had a lot of domestic violence cases. And I would tell the women, I cannot solve everything. I'm your tool. It's your life. You have the ultimate responsibility, but I will do what is possible to do for you. And so I didn't want to get into solving their emotional problems because but I recognized that, you know, well, I would refer them to help for battered women. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if I can jump in, I think what you're making a very important point, because it's emotions that drive divorce, and emotions in the beginning tend to run really high, right? Everybody's a little bit crazy. And that's normal, but it's not helpful. And so when someone comes to me, first of all, they're coming to me these days as a coach. So I can give them the tools and talk with them and work with them to help them manage their emotions so that they can get to the end of their divorce without, having everything take longer and cost more and get blown up because of the emotionality of it all. But if what they're looking for is figuring out, most people want to know, why is this happening? What can I do? Poor me, blah, blah, blah. Get a therapist, right? Therapists and coaches do very different things, and they're both necessary, especially in a highly emotional situation like a divorce. If you want to figure out how you got into this situation, why this is happening to you, what happened in your childhood, or what did your mother do, because it's always your childhood or your mother, right? Um, what happened to you then that made you this way now? Get yourself a therapist. It's going to be money well spent, 100%. But if you want to learn how to manage your emotions so that you can think and make decisions and get done with your divorce, a coach can help you with that. A lawyer wants nothing to do with any of that. They just they're worried about the legal process, getting you through, protecting rights, making sure that you don't do something that you wish you hadn't done later. It's different skill sets and different professionals. And just like they used to say, it takes a village to raise a child, I think it takes a village to get through to divorce too. There's all different kinds of professionals, and not all of them are going to charge you an arm and a leg. As a matter of fact, the key to getting through your divorce efficiently and effectively is choosing the right professional for the right job that you need at the right time. And then as the team helps you, you can get through and do it more effectively, I think.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but I've had some sad stories of people who think their lawyers are advocates, the knight in shining armor who's going to fight to their rescue, and instead they end up ripped off by their own lawyers.
That happens too.
Yeah, like one woman that consulted me, she was doing her own appeal, and she had been married just 2 years in her 50s. This guy had pursued her, but immediately when they got married, he turned his true self abusive. And in 2 years, she left him, and he said, "If you leave me, I will ruin you." So she took him at his word and hired the #1 shark of Orange County, same one. And she didn't have money, so the lawyer says, "Well, you can sign a lien on your house for attorney's fees." It's not uncommon to do that. But so she did. And the first court appearance, the lawyer and husband's lawyer and husband went into a conference room, left her in the cold hallway, and they came out with a stipulation. And she read this. It involved refinancing the house and paying off husband's share. And she said, "I can't do that. I couldn't afford this. This is terrible." And the lawyer says, "Court's closing. The judge will be mad. Sign, sign, sign." So she was coerced into signing. On the refi, lawyer from his lien got paid $19,000, and he quit. he got relieved as counsel. And there she was.
Right.
Yeah. It's like anything else, though. I don't want to lawyer bash because there's good and bad in every profession.
True.
And I've had the privilege of working with colleagues who are outstanding. They're good at the law. They're really trying. They really care about their clients. And I've also seen lawyers, to your point, Judith, who are perhaps less so of all of those things, right? So it just depends on who you get to represent you. And that's why I think that's one of the most important decisions that someone can make is who do you have representing you, and making sure that the person that you hire is aligned with whatever you want and whatever way you want to do it. If you want to try to work things out and you hire the biggest shark of Orange County, it's not going to go well, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and subsequently, if the same thing is true if your spouse has the biggest shark lawyer and you hire someone who wants to play nice, you're going to get run over.
Right.
You've got to match the lawyer to your style and to what's going on in your situation, and not be afraid to change if things aren't working out the way you had in mind.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that the important thing is to remember it's your life. You can't just hand things over blindly to the lawyer and think the lawyer's going to take care of it. You need to monitor and make sure it's going the way you want.
Yep.
Right.
And that's exactly, we're right back full circle to where we started. Why do I do the things that I do? And Judith, why do you do the things that you do? Because we've seen that lawyers, not all lawyers are created equal, and there are big gaps in what they're going to do and what you think they're going to do or what you want done. And I always say to my clients, I don't care if you've got the best lawyer on the planet. There is no one that's going to care about your divorce more than you are. So if you don't take an active role in it and you just go, oh, poor me, or let the lawyer do it, you're going to get what you get.
Yeah, and there's no lifeguard in the lawyer pool.
Right. So if I can interpret, if we've got two lawyers involved and they're listening to their clients and collaborating there, then that's probably a good thing. That's headed toward a good solution. If one of those happens to be, the best lawyer in the county, so to speak, and has only one goal, then I need to be brave enough to say, no, not interested, walk away, find somebody who does represent my interests.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Yes. There's a very important statistic that we have not yet addressed.
Yes, ma'am.
And that has to do with children. And that has to do with stress by the parents being inflicted upon the children. And nowadays it's called adverse childhood experiences. And one lawyer in Orange County had lectured the family law and the guardian lawyers about that the stress of the parents, the money, the time in court affects the small minds, the little children. And except the worst part of this is that there are children who are murdered by parents going through divorce. And there's an organization in Marin County called Center for Judicial Excellence that since 2008 has been tracking child deaths from parents involved in divorce and separation. And they have found that since 2008, they track in all the states, there's been about 995 children murdered by a parent.
Oh, that's incredible.
So that's another reason to argue against the stressful court process, is how it affects young children.
Right.
Yeah, I've had the privilege on my podcast of interviewing people, child experts, but also what's been fascinating is interviewing adult children who, when they were young, their parents divorced, and now they have more of a voice, and some of them have written books, and some of them have, they're trying to let people know what the effect of divorce is on their children. It reminds me of a story. years ago, I was, a lawyer in court, and there was an older lawyer that I was up against, and he and his wife had gotten divorced. And he used to get so frustrated with his children and upset because he and his wife would be in some argument. They were already divorced, but they're still arguing about the kids, right? Because they're still parents. And so they're arguing about something. And he said, and the kids would always take my wife's side. And I didn't understand what was going on. And later on, he got older. He went and turned to the kids. He's like, I'm just curious. Why did you always take her side? And the kids said to him, Dad, we knew you were right. We just didn't want you to fight. And that says it all, right? I remember I was a guardian ad litem in a case too. And these people, I wasn't involved in the case when they got divorced. The kids were, I don't know, 5 and 6 when they got divorced. By the time I got in the case, the kids were 8 and 9. By the time I got out of the case, the kids were like 13 and 14. And after I was out of the case, I was in the courthouse, saw the same family again, right? They just kept fighting over the kids. They always found something to fight about. And at one point I asked my clients, the kids, I said, what do you want? And they just said to me, we don't want to go to court. We don't want to fight. The kids want peace. That's it. And so that's something, it's a message that I hope all parents out there hear, because it's the conflict between the two spouses, whether you're married or not, that causes kids the most damage.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Listen, there's interestingly, the state of Illinois in their family law, which I thought was a good provision, is that you cannot take a spouse back to court for a modification of a parenting plan without at first showing that there has been a serious change of circumstances.
Yeah, the substantial change of circumstances.
And here in California, anytime you can file a case in court. I have one woman that I know that her child is now 14 years old. They've been to court 28 times. Husband keeps taking her back for little nitpicky things, and there's no gatekeeper that stops him from doing that. She said to me, when Elisa gets to be 18, I can have her life back.
Yeah.
And she said her child is withdrawn, has no friends, is very shy. So,
and her college fund probably went to pay the lawyer's fees.
Yeah, well, and then mom runs her own business, and here she has to keep going to court. I wanted to add one other state thing is that Colorado is one of the parenting plan states, and they have a standing committee on family law issues as part of their legislature or their court process. And somehow I got invited to speak to that group. And so I looked at their family law business, and I saw that lawyers, they do parenting plans, but all the lawyers, family law lawyers' websites that I looked at advertise strongly custody and visitation litigation. I mean, it's like, but now there's a very interesting law in Utah, brand new as of last September. Brand new. You cannot file for a divorce if you have children until you have a written parenting plan. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And the state on their law, if you look them up online, they have all kinds of forms and suggestions as to how to write a parenting plan. And then if you can't do it yourself, they offer a mediator
Right.
help you with the parenting plan. And if all else fails, a judge will write one for you. But I thought, that's a very interesting approach. It gets the kid stuff out of the way of all the other issues of division of property. So
Right,
we'll see
because
how
you're
that
required
goes.
to do that before you even move ahead.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Though, you've just described what, everybody's faced with these days. And, it's the weaponization of healthcare, the weaponization of the legal process that doesn't represent, and protect the litigants. In other words, they come in for something relatively simple. Yes, it's emotional and it's painful, but, you know, and then we elevate it to a level we never expected to see. And I personally have never experienced that. And when I went through the process, so it's interesting to hear you tell these tales. Oh God, what are you showing us there, Judith? Please.
You said weaponization. This is a book, and chapter 8, judicial jujitsu, using the legal system as a weapon. This is Screw the Bitch, divorce tactics for men.
Oh God. Right. And who wrote this?
Dick Hart, H-A-R-T. Look at that picture.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, no, it's pretty ugly.
Yeah, that's really ugly.
Yeah, pretty ugly.
Yeah.
But if that's the kind of approach that you're going to take, look, it's going to come back and bite you. Karma happens. I don't care what your belief system is, but what goes around comes around. And if you want to hire the biggest shark lawyer and not settle no matter what and really take your spouse to the cleaners, you're going to the cleaners with them, right? So understand it's going to cost you and it's going to cost your kids. To think that your kids won't be affected by that kind of nonsense is dreaming. It's delusional. Of course your children are going to be affected. You might as well start the therapy fund for them now.
Yeah, but some men just have an instinct for the weaponizing. Like some young woman came to talk to me. I knew her mother years ago, but her mom says, go talk to Judith. And so her husband started out with, when they separated and she moved out, he went to the DA's office and charged her with child stealing. Well, she got cleared of it, but now she's tainted forever. Child support services. Dad has custody of the 9-year-old, and she hasn't seen her for 11 months because he keeps ignoring the visitation orders, and she's helpless except unless she takes him to court for contempt.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it reminds me.
The weaponizing is some people just have an instinct for it.
Yeah.
Right.
And some people, I don't know, they seem to enjoy the game. I don't understand it personally, but there's a woman I met. Again, I interviewed her, Lisa Johnson, on a podcast, and she has a website that she runs that's called Been There, Got Out. And
Right.
she talks about helping her clients against legal abuse. Like those are her words. And she went through hell, and now she helps people, so that they don't have to go through the same hell.
But let me ask you, Karen, and Jim, what do you think of the idea that if we take divorce out of the courts, that let's say if you want to separate, you go to a family services organization, and they will do a triage and find out if there is violence. There's 3.8% I've heard of divorces have a high conflict person. And those people with high conflict issues will be shunted off into a more controlled system. But the other people will, first thing, have help working out a parenting plan, and then guidance in filling out all the rest of the divorce process. A family services system, because my thought is that you go to a court, well, courts are for right and wrong and proving this and accusing that, and it sets you up for hostility from the get-go.
Yeah, I agree. Like some alternative system would be a beautiful thing. I keep looking for that better way. And if there was a place that families could go where they could get whatever type of services they needed, whether it was financial advice, whether it was, a therapist, whether it was a realtor, whether it was, all the different things all in one place, and get them through to a final divorce in some way other than in the legal system, that would be a beautiful thing. And I think people are trying that in different places, but I haven't heard of anything taking off in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
my standpoint, your comment about the parenting plan in Colorado sets the stage for other issues to also be solved as a prerequisite for filing for divorce. I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And yes, I think a business would gravitate around this set of prerequisites that says, you got to solve this, 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 this. You got to come to court ready to talk about these before we're even going to waste time on it.
Yeah.
Because number one, it would shorten the overall time you're engaged. It would also lessen the cost, and it would walk you through a rational plan, and it would give you time to also defuse your emotions and grow to some level of common sense to deal with the issues at hand. I like that as an individual. I think that protects me. It protects wasted time in the court. It doesn't solve the 8 to 10% that you're talking about where they need to butt heads for it to work.
Excuse me, Jim, but it's not generally it's usually one of them is the high conflict person that creates this, and the other one is stuck with dealing with it.
But the prerequisite would be even-handedly administered. So the high conflict person may not like it, but they still have the same legal requirement to do it as the low conflict person. To me, it's kind of a leveling effect. I don't know if it would work or not, but I like the idea.
Who knows?
I once upon a time tried to organize people to demand this. I called it the Safe and Sane Divorce Project. And I went to I knew the people that started and participated in the collaborative law group in Orange County here. Mm-hmm. And I go to lunch, and these two women that I've known since I started lawyering, we all started at the same time, were talking about how bad the court system was. So I wrote them, these two women, each a nice letter and suggesting maybe they could join with me to try to redo the court system. The next meeting, the two of them acted like they hoped I didn't talk to them.
Oh boy.
Nobody, I couldn't find anybody to join with me to redo the court system for families.
Right. Sounds like somebody's sacred cow might be.
Lawyer that wants to be on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Any wrap-up comments for our audience of novices? Judith?
Oh, my thought is that it will take civic organizations like women's clubs, the Rotary, Kiwanis, to put the demands on their legislators to change family law. The legislatures will not do it on their own. There's too much money involved.
Right. And Karen?
So that brings me to my comment, which is, with all due respect to the legislators and politicians, I don't have a lot of faith in any of them, and I don't think necessarily that the system is going to change anytime soon. And even if it does, it doesn't help the people who are in it right now. So my best advice is, if you are thinking about a divorce, if you are going through a divorce, take control of your own situation yourself. Get the right team of professionals, stay out of court, use the judge to sign the paperwork. Like, they'll let them do their piece that they have to do. But for everything else, it's your life. Take control yourself. Get a coach, get a therapist, get whatever professionals you need, but understand that there are better ways to do it, but they're not going to just happen. You have to take control.
Right.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. So before we depart, if you care to, how about tell the audience how they can reach you, read your book, find your website, whatever that might be. Judith?
Marriage License Test is the website, the Marriage License Test. And if you want to read my old stuff, my website, the safeandsanedivorceproject.com, is still available to read, as is my mediation writings, judithkaluzny.com.
Okay.
So the best place for people to find me is on my website. It's karencovy.com. That's KarenCovy.com. There's no E in my version of Covy. Otherwise, I'd be related to someone famous and I wouldn't have to work for a living. So that's the best place to find me. And I'm on all the socials at Karen Covy.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for your insightful comments today. And You've opened my eyes. I'm sure everyone else will appreciate the perspectives. And you have yourself a good day, and we hope to see you again.
Thanks.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye now.
It's been interesting and productive.
So, folks, that wraps up our presentation for today. I want to thank our guests, Karen Covy and Judith Kaluzny. I really admire their commitment to rational and effective disengagement. Thank you for attending Vision in Action Live today and taking your precious time to hear what we have to show. We hope you got some answers to your questions. I know it opened my eyes a bit. As you know, Vision in Action Live podcasts focus on interviews with subject matter experts and people leading self-directed lives so that you can actually see what you can accomplish towards personal development if you're doing the right things and have the right basic information. Check out the newsletters, podcasts, and extensive reference materials at lifelongfulfillment.com. It's all there for you. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and your favorite podcast channel, and on KFRED Internet Radio. I'm Jim Boswell, your host. You can reach me at jim@lifelongfulfillment.com. And until next time, how will you be acting differently knowing what you now know? Thanks for joining. See you next week.
Lifelong